and welcome back to another video for a Terraform in Azure for beginners. In the last few videos, we've managed to build pretty much all our infrastructure now. So we've built a resource group, VNet, subnets with NSGs, we've built all the server infrastructure, we've provisioned the guest operating system with IIS in this case, and with the SQL server we configured the disks. We use custom disk extensions with scripts coming off these containers over here. We set up a management server to allow our admins to remote access in, and we've got it all secured with NSGs. So all we've got to do now is allow our users access to the environment through this web application firewall. But before we do that, what we're going to do is we're going to switch the authentication method over from what we're currently using, which is the Azure CLI login, and we're going to switch over to an SPN. And the reason we're doing that now is because it's going to make it a lot easier, because we're going to have to start using the key vault, and it makes it a lot simpler for future proofing our code if we start using security principles to access the environment rather than the context of the person running the actual Terraform plans. So in this video, it's probably going to be a short video. We're going to create a key vault, we're going to set up change our authentication method, and we can store some secrets in this key vault and access them through the Terraform code. So yeah, let's move over to our client machine. Okay, so we're back at our client machine, and let's open up Visual Studio and see where we left off. Okay, actually, before we get started, if you remember from the last video with the custom script extensions, we had an issue where one of the SQL disks didn't provision through the automation of the script. I think I know why that is. If you cast your mind back to one of those earlier videos where we covered the declarative nature of Terraform, and I expressed the importance of Terraform can only work if it knows the dependencies. Now, if you have a look here where the scripts are actually being run, if you notice, it's implicitly aware that the VM needs to exist before it tries to run a script. But there's nothing in there that needs to make sure that the disks have been provisioned. In fact, more than provisioned, actually be attached. So what we're going to do to fix that is, if we come to the bottom of this module that actually runs the scripts, let's create a depends on feature, and it's going to depend on the attachment of disks. So let's add that in there, and it was disk attach. Yeah, so what this means is not only is it waiting for the VMs to be created implicitly, but now we've put an explicit dependency. That means that the disk attachment task that attaches it to the SQL server has to be in place first before it tries to run the script. So I'm pretty sure that's probably why I only provisioned one disk and not two, because the other one hadn't finished being provisioned yet. So when the script ran through, there was only one to provision. So let's clear that up. Okay, so what do we do first? So for those that you watched the earlier videos, and I explained that we just skipped over the authentication part because we were currently using the Azure CLI. So if we just log in again, just to demonstrate. So we're currently using the context of this account to run all our Terraform plan, commits, supplies, etc. And as you can see, let's just make this a bit bigger. You can see the context, it already knows all my credentials and it knows how to connect and what to connect as. What we're going to do now is we're going to switch over to a different authentication type, so that we can actually do away with the CLI authentication. We need to do this really to future-proof the code, especially when we put it into Azure DevOps in the next couple of videos. So let's have a look. Let's head over to Terraform.io and see what options we've got. Registry, browse providers, Azure, documentation. Okay, so let's have a look at authentication. Let's see if there's anything on that. There we go. So Azure provider authentication via service principal or client certificate. So that's the one we're going to use. So there's a number of options. We've been using this top one, the CLI. Obviously you've got managed service identity. We're not going to use that. That's more if you were going to run Terraform. I don't know. You basically, an MSI is something that you can assign to a resource, and then the context of that MSI will be used whenever the resource tries to access another resource. So you could use this in a scenario like perhaps you've got a VM where you run all your Terraform commands from. You can give that VM the managed service identity and then give that managed service identity the permissions to the subscription, etc. What we're going to use, we're going to use the this one, authenticating to Azure with a service principal and client secret. So basically a username and password in layman's terms. So let's have a look and see what's involved on this one. So we need to provide a client ID, a client secret, subscription ID, and a tenant ID. It needs to have at least contributor rights to the subscription. And there's some commands there to create it manually if we wanted to. Sorry, through code. What else have we got that's useful here? Hopefully there's an example where we can just copy and paste. There we go. Right, okay, so you can store the values. Obviously, we're going to store them in clear text in our code, but we'll shift that. But you could actually put an environment variable on your client machine. So these are the sort of the values that Terraform will look for. And if it finds these on your machine, it will just take the values that you put in there, so your password, your keys, and it will automatically feed them into the code. That's ideal if you're developing, which is great. But because we're going to move it into Azure DevOps, obviously Azure DevOps is not going to have access to our local environment. So it's a great method, but we're not going to use that on this case. And then obviously we've got to set the features up like this. This is what I'm looking for. So let's grab that and head over to our code. And if you remember, we had this providers block. At the moment it's empty. The fact that it's empty is going to assume we're going to use Azure CLI. So let's add these in. So we could put all our details in there, hard code it, etc. And obviously it's assuming that the client secret's there. So what do we need to put in here? Well, we need to create something in a minute. But before we do that, let's create variables for these, because I don't like having hard-coded things in here. So let's create some variables. Let's head over to our variables file. And let's create one. Let's create a variable for our SPN client ID. I'm not going to bother giving it a type. You probably would do if you were doing it properly, but obviously this is only demo. We also need a client secret. And what else are we going to need? Tenant ID, I think there was there? Yeah, got a tenant ID. So SPN tenant dash ID. And what was the other one? I think this is subscription, wasn't it? Yeah, so we need a subscription, so let's grab that. SPN subscription ID. Okay, so we've got some variables, and let's use them in our providers. So it's var subscription ID, var client ID, var client secret, SPN client secret, and var tenant ID. Okay, so we've got our code logic, but we still need to provide values to these variables. Naturally, if I run Terraform apply now, obviously it's going to prompt me for them on the terminal. Which is probably fine, but what are these values going to be? Well, we need to create a service principal name. So we need to head over to the portal for that. So let's head over to our Terraform Azure portal, and let's create one. So you go to Azure Active Directory, and you want to go to Application Registrations. So we're going to create a new registration. And we're going to call it SPN RPG Labs Terraform. I think that's easy enough. Keep the defaults, because we're not going to use it for anything more than other than like a user identity effectively. So we don't need to play around with any of those. So let's just register that. So we've now got our SPN. So we've got an application client ID. So let's grab that. In fact, what we're going to do to make it a little bit simpler, let's just create a notepad quickly. that we can record these. So the client ID is going to be, that was a bad copy and paste, wasn't it? Let's try again. Can I undo that? Did I grab it from the clipboard? So yeah, so the client ID is the application ID. So let's stick that in there. Let's tidy this up a little bit. The client secret we'll generate in a minute. The SPN tenant ID we need. Actually, it's probably a bit small for you guys to see, isn't it? Let me zoom in. And we're also going to need a tenant ID, a subscription ID, sorry. So what do we need? Tenant ID next. Let's grab that. So there's a tenant ID. And we're also going to need the subscription ID. It's not on that screen. So if we go back to Azure directory, we should have a tenant ID here. There we go. So let's stick that into our notepad. No, hold on a minute. That was a tenant ID. I need the subscription ID. Sorry. So let's head over to our subscription. There's our subscription ID. Now we need a client secret. So we need to generate a new secret for that. So if we head back over to our Azure Active Directory, app registrations, and let's have a look for our SPN we just created. So what we can do now is we can actually generate a secret. So we'll create a new client secret. Let's give it a name of Terraform. It can be anything, it's arbitrary. It's not the actual name, it's just the identifier within the object. Terraform. Just leave it for 6 months. And it's going to give us this key. So I'm going to paste that in to our notepad. So that's our password. So if that's the identity used to connect to the context that we're going to use. Obviously, I'm going to change that before the video gets uploaded, so don't try and use it. Right, so we've got that. Now what do we need to do? We need to now add all this into our variables. So if we were to run Terraform plan now, for example, it's going to prompt. It's going to prompt for these values because we haven't provided them yet and they're used. So we should see it come up at the bottom down here. Didn't like something there. Oh, I'll try to do an apply. Got to do a plan. Yeah, so now it's asking for the SPN client ID for us to add it in there. So obviously we could just copy and paste it out of these as it asked us. But yeah, that's going to be a bit painful each time we run it. So if you remember back from the previous video where we covered variables and the way that you can change the variables at runtime, there's this concept of terraform.tfvars. .tfvars. So if this file exists, I don't know why it didn't like that. So if this file exists, it's going to take the variables from here and feed them into the pipe, into the command at runtime. So it's going to make it a lot easier for us. So if we just grab those and stick them in our TFRs, they should match and it should feed them in as we run the command. So hopefully when we run it next, it's going to take those variables from the TFR file and populate them in and use them in our provider block and connect under the context of our new SPN. But we're not ready yet. Let's clear this out because I don't like seeing red on the screen. Yeah, we're not ready yet. So our SPN, if you remember back here, it said it needed access to, what was the permissions it needed? So it needed contributor access rights on our subscription. So let's go and set that permission up now. So back over to the Azure portal. Let's go to our subscription and this access control, IAM, role assignments, and we're going to add a new role and we're going to give it contributor and we're going to add it to our new SPN, which is that one there. Next, view and assign. Okay, so we should now have permissions to run that. So let's just do a Terraform plan and see what we get. Okay, so it looks like it had permissions to do everything it needed. Otherwise, we wouldn't have got this far. I'm not going to run a Terraform apply yet because I don't want to build the infrastructure yet because there's some other bits we want to cover. So we've got all of authentication set up now. We're running under the context of this. So later on, when we do the Azure DevOps pipeline, we can also use the same identity and we know everything's going to work. Right, so what can we do now? If you remember, when we did the server builds, we had passwords in here. Obviously, that's not ideal because we're going to check this code into a source code repository, and anyone that looks at the code is going to see our passwords to our admin boxes. So let's sort this out. Let's move the admin password into a key vault, and we use that SPN that we just created to retrieve that when the code runs. So the first thing we need to do is create a key vault. So let's head over to our subscription. If you remember, we did create this out of bands, is what I like to call it, resource group, where we had our TF state. So this is stuff that is it's stateful, so it needs to kind of stay. It's not being managed by Terraform. It's kind of outside of Terraform. So we'll create our key vault in here. So let's go to Marketplace, just search for key vault. Oh, wrong button. Hold on. Don't want those ones. Key vault. Yeah, so it's the Microsoft Key Vault. Create. We're going to give it a name of KV RPG Labs Terraform. We're going to create it in North Europe because that's where all our infrastructure is. It doesn't really matter what region, but I like to keep everything. We're going for the standard tier. We're only going to be storing some passwords and probably a certificate later on for the web application firewall. So let's review and create that. Okay. So that's creating now. Just take a few minutes. Okay, so that's finished. So let's head over to the resource. So here's our key vault. I will do a complete course on Key Vault because it's a fantastic resource that Azure gives us. You can do some wonderful things with it, but for the sake of what we're using it for now, we're going to use it just to store our passwords. So let's head over to the secrets tab and let's just create one. We're going to manually call it, and let's call it admin password. And the actual password is going to be, we'll keep it the same as what we're currently using. So this is actually going to be our key secret. I'm not going to worry about setting expiry dates because you can do, but for this demo we're not bothered and we're going to enable it. So effectively what we're doing is we're creating a secret in this key vault called admin password, and when someone queries and gets that, it's going to give the value of our password. Simple. Right, now what though? So we need to allow someone access to this key vault. And you've probably guessed it, we're going to create an access policy here, and we're going to allow our SPN access to it. So let's, for the sake of argument, I'm just going to give it access to all the keys, secrets, and certificate permissions. Obviously, in a production environment, you would restrict the principal to have basically to scope it to the options that you want it to have. So ideally, you probably just want to be able to do list and recover, or at least list to retrieve it. Obviously, I'm giving it way more permissions than it needs, but hey, it's a demo. So next, and we're going to assign it to our SPN, which is that one. Okay, and we've created that. So we've now got a key vault with our secret password in there for our admin machines, and we've now given an access policy to our SPN to be able to access it. So we're all good. So now what do we do? So in our code, we need to somehow get access to that key vault. So let's head over to the Terraform.io and have a look. Key vault. Azure RM key vault. Let's have a look at that one. Okay, we don't want a resource because that's creating a key vault by the looks of it. So we actually want the data source. So we want to access an existing key vault. So that's where we use a data source connection rather than a resource block. So this one is your key vault. So we kind of need this. So let's take that over to our code and make it work. So in our providers block, in our main, let's do key vault. Right, so it's going to connect. We don't want to call it example. Let's call it KV even. It needs a name for the key vault and a resource group name where that key vault is located. Now, naturally, we're going to want to give this into variables, aren't we? So let's create a variable so that we can change it if we need to. So let's create another variable and we'll call this KV. And you know from the previous videos, I love the type map because it allows us to create objects. So type equals map, and we're going to give that a Vinny. Okay, so let's give it some defaults. So what did we have on there? So we need a name and a resource group name. So let's give it a name, and we need a resource group name. So what are these values? Well, we know what they are, don't we? Because when we created the key vault, we know that the key vault name is this. So let's take that. And the resource group name we placed our key vault is it on this page? Yeah, that one. TF state. Okay, so we now got a variable for our key vault. So let's head back over to our main.tf and use those variables. It's var kv dot name and var kv dot resource group name. That should be enough to allow us to connect to our key vault. But then once we've connected to the key vault, we need to get that secret. So let's head over to Terraform IO again. So what do we need to look for here? Is it going to be secret? Is that going to be a good enough search? Or do you need to be something a bit more explicit? Search for key vault again. It's going to be a data access. There we go. So data source, there's a certificate, key, secret is the one we want. So let's grab that block. All right, so key vault secret, let's call this admin password, because obviously that's what we're going to be collecting. And the name, so we need the name of what we gave the object in the key vault. So if we go back to our secrets, what did we call it? Admin password. And we want it from this key vault, which is KV. So let's change it to that. Okay, so we should now have connection to our key vault, and then we have connection to our admin password. I did notice on that example there that it had an output. We haven't covered output yet, but let's do an output so we can see that we've actually got a connection. So output allows you to basically outlook to the terminal once completion the value of something. In this case, it's obviously it's going to be this key secret. Obviously, output's a lot more powerful than just that. You can use it to feed into other things. So perhaps you've got a public IP address that's dynamic, and you want to feed that into, I don't know, an update DNS automation task where it updates your DNS records, for example. So you can use that with an output. We'll cover output in a future video, but for the moment, just bear with me. So let's call it secret value, and obviously we want it from this. So we want it from that resource with this object identifier and the value of it, and it is sensitive true because obviously it's going to display it probably in, I would imagine, asterisks or some kind of hashed out way. So let's have a look and see whether this is actually connecting to our key vault. So let's do a plan. Hopefully it will allow us to connect to that key vault and retrieve our admin password. There we go. So yeah, it's connected and it's retrieved it, but it's obviously not telling us what the value is because it's secret. So we're good. So we don't need that anymore. So we know we're connecting to our key vault and we know we've got the password. Now, how do we use that? Well, if we go back up to our, in fact, let me just undo that because that's exactly what we need. Let's grab that and now delete it. So if we now go up to our resource where we the resource block that's creating our VMs here. So if you notice, we're getting our admin password currently from our variable stack over here, there. But instead of getting it from there, we can simply add that there. So now it's going to get it from our key vault, which we've declared further down in the code. So no longer are we exposing or needing to expose that. So if I just take that out for the moment, we could delete them, but for the moment, just to make sure it works, it's not going to use those anymore. So now if we do a Terraform plan, yeah, still no errors. So all that logic works. We haven't actually got the infrastructure deployed because I did destroy it on the last video. So let's just confirm that. Yeah, so we haven't got it at all. So let's build it all from scratch and then we'll go in and test it and make sure it's got the correct password that we want. And we'll check those SQL disks as well. So let's do a Terraform apply. Okay, that finally finished. That took a good 10 minutes to build all that infrastructure. Obviously we started from scratch, but yeah, it doesn't normally take that long. So I don't know whether Azure's got some throttling going on at the moment, or perhaps it's just busy. But yeah, it's finally done. So let's head over and take a look. So the first thing is we've got our resource group. We've got our management server. So let's grab the IP address of that and make sure we can still connect to it with our password. So let's log into that. Okay, we know it's admin user and I still can't remember the password. So I'm just still going to copy it from here. Let's put that in. Yes, it's connected. So it's used the password from the key vault. So let's log into that. And while that's warming up, let's get the IP address of that SQL server and make sure that it's got the 2 disks that we wanted. So the IP address of that is 424. So let's jump onto that. (10.424). Again, that should be using the same password from the key vault. If I still got it on my clipboard. Yes. So hopefully we've got the 2 disks that we wanted with that fix we put with a depends on statement, where we explicitly made a dependency on the disk attach. Okay, let's head over to our file explorer. And fingers crossed, yeah, we got our 2 disks. So that was the issue, dependency. So we fixed that as well. So if we now go back to our management box, so while we're here, let's have a quick look. So technically that web server, we shouldn't need to log on to it. We should just be able to access it now through a browser because we created that test web app, and fingers crossed all our script extensions have worked. So let's just go through this. What was the IP address of our web server? because obviously we can only access it internally at the moment. So we can access it from the management box. Where's our web server? And it's 414. So let's head back over and let's see if we can access it in the browser. HTTP, it's obviously port 80. 10.414. There we go, our test website, all fully working. So just before I go, I'm just going to destroy all the infrastructure because I don't want it costing me money. There, oh, what's going on there? Form destroy. Can't type, but you know that already because you've seen my videos. Right, so while that's destroying, what we're going to do next. So let's head back over to our slides quickly. Yeah, so we're pretty much built. Yeah, just to recap, everything's built. We've got our key vault now. We've put all our secrets in there. We're going to also put the certificates in there in the next video. We've created we haven't created a managed identity yet, but we'll do that in the next video. We still need to create this application gateway firewall and web application firewall to allow our users to come in. So we'll do that in the next video. Again, thanks for watching this video. I hope you found it useful. If you do like it, please hit that like button. And so you don't miss the future videos, hit that subscribe button. It really helps me if you do. Yeah, so until next time, guys, take care.